Hi everybody and welcome to today's eLN webinar, which as you see is on chatbots with the expert Jamie Good. I met Jamie at Learning Technologies last year, this year in February, where he did a presentation about chatbots and it was really engaging. So I think we're in for a pretty good session. Now I'm going to stop talking now, just a couple of housekeeping things to say. We've already been saying use the chat box, but make sure you're writing to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you're writing. There's a poll out there at the moment just on membership and your previous experience of chatbots. I'll close that shortly and then I'll open up a poll at the end on evaluation, and Jamie's got a few questions for you during the session. So over to you, Jamie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then on you go.
Great, thanks so much, Joan. I was going to say good morning, everyone, because it's morning for me here, but I'll say good morning and afternoon now that I see that we've got some people in North America and some in Europe. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm super happy to be here to share some of my experience and knowledge around chatbots, hoping that it will help you understand them a bit better and how you could use them in your workplace. As Joan has mentioned in the chat there, I'll take questions at any time. Just make sure that you have your setting to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your question as well, so that we don't have too many repeated or anything like that. I've got some examples of chatbots that I think are good and some case studies, lots of information, so let's dig in. I'm just going to turn off my webcam though while I do this, just to make sure that the bandwidth and everything is fine for the audio and the presentation. So I will disappear here in a second and let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to kind of put up front is the learning challenges that I kind of see chatbots being able to help solve. For example, the untethered modern learner. I believe that today the modern learner is untethered, different than before, where people don't always go into the office, people don't always have contact with their team face to face, so they're more untethered, working from home, etc., especially because of all the digital tools we have that allow that. Another challenge that we have with learning these days is making it engaging and sticky, the stickiness of the learning, to make sure that people are engaged with it but also remember it. I like to always talk about the frictionless learning experience. So one thing I've been pushing a lot lately is frictionless learning, and I think that chatbots help in that way as well. Retrieval and performance support, I think, is a challenge for us, where we're trying to get people to remember what they learn and then apply it, to actually apply it at the moment of that they have to perform. Learning on demand, just in time. We are used to this with apps and other things that we have in our lives, so I think that people are expecting that with learning as well. And then data. It's available to us now to be able to collect data on learning, and so why don't we do this? And chatbots can help us do that a little bit easier and more in the moment as well. So to start, I just want to make sure that we all have the same understanding of what a chatbot is. So I've just put up a very simple definition. A chatbot is a service powered by rules and sometimes artificial intelligence that you interact with via a chat interface. So that's kind of the simplest definition I could find for you on a chatbot. So it works inside a messaging platform, a chat interface, and sometimes artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not always necessary. I think that currently artificial intelligence is not super up to speed in making sure that the chatbot responds properly to any request or question. And so sometimes artificial intelligence is a good thing, sometimes not so much. It depends on the situation. So I had that question at the beginning that most of you have answered, I believe, that are you currently using any chatbots? It seemed like about 53% of you are not, and some of you are. So if you wouldn't mind, if you are using a chatbot, could you share which chatbot you use currently and for what purpose in the chat window? I'd be super curious to know, those of you who are using them, what are you using them for, and maybe the names, and then other people would be able to take advantage of the experience that you have and check those out as well. I will just write in the chatbot now for everyone. One of the chatbots that I use and I think is really great is called Wobot. that works on Facebook Messenger if you'd like to kind of jot that down to check that out. Another one that's super popular is called Poncho, which also works in Facebook Messenger and tells you the weather, but it's actually quite hilarious using that. So, and what else do we have here? Someone is using a WebEx Teams chatbot. Oh, that's cool. Michelle is saying, thinking about using chatbots, but not using one yet. Is anyone else using one? Please just mention it there in the chat. Someone's been experimenting with Microsoft's Q&A bot framework. Oh, that's great. And any others that you have? Oh, looking at Learning Pool's Auto, but not using it yet. I've heard of Auto. I've heard good things about it. And someone else is testing Q&A Maker for technical support. Richard says Woebot is brilliant, a great mental health support tool, not something we're playing with actively, but a great idea. I agree. Some people have issue with Woebot just in terms of the kind of humor and the way that it approaches that. I think though, if you want a good example of a chatbot that has retrieval practice, has the combination of push and pull, and is also quite engaging and helpful, I think Woebot for me is kind of the perfect example right now. It was built through Stanford, and it's based on research and evidence, so it's quite good. And another one is Babylon Health Services. Excellent. So I'd like to see that people are using different ones. And for those of you who are not, here are some great ideas for you to try out. Thank you for putting your answers there in the chat. So I have another question for you. What do you think is the most common activity on a smartphone? If you want to throw that up in the chat as well, I'd love to see what you guys think is the most common activity on a smartphone. Let's see what you think. Messaging services, social media, checking it 4 million times a day, searching, text, checking the time. Isn't that true? That's why I started wearing my watch again, because I was tired pulling my phone out of my pocket. Siri, how do I do something? WhatsApp, Weibo, messaging. Great, there's lots of great ideas here. Checking social media. How many are addicted to Facebook? Hands up. Yes, me too. And Instagram. So here's the most common activity on a smartphone. 97% of Americans text at least once a day. And I searched for the UK, and what I found is that WhatsApp is the second most popular app behind Facebook, and it is a messaging platform. So in the UK, it's a very common activity as well, messaging. And this is why I like chatbots, is because pretty much everybody who has a smartphone is texting or messaging. So you don't have to teach people how to use a chatbot. It's something they already know how to do. And so the barrier to entry is pretty much nil or very low for most people. So this is one thing I really like. Now, the other interesting thing here is that text messages have a 90% open rate. So you probably know yourself, when you get a text message, it's very hard for us not to check it, not to open up that text and see what somebody is saying to us. Not the same for everything else that we have though. And so when you think about learning, you want people to engage, and 90% open rate for messaging pretty much guarantees that people are going to look at what you send to them through a chatbot. Now, another question, what do you think is an average open rate for email, just for comparison's sake? So you have an idea of how great. 50% someone thinks for email, 30, 3%, 10%, 60, 30. Well, it's interesting. I kind of think that when some people guess this percentage, it tells me what their approach to email is in their inbox. 75%, 40%. Oh, it's all over the board here. That's great. So actually, the average open rate for UK email marketing campaigns last year was 24.79%, and the click-through rate, which is a little bit the more important metric, was only 4%. So when people get emails, they only open about 24% of what companies or people send out, and then clicking on any certain link or like a image that takes them somewhere else to a website, for example, is only 4. So that's the actual active engagement. So remember, text messages are 90. So I just want to put that up there for a comparison to show you how much more engaged we are with text messages, and therefore why I am a big fan of using chatbots. And as Joan says, it's not far off from the 3%. It's very true. I think I get a little bit overwhelmed with our inboxes and sometimes just ignore them. So let's go to The next part of why I think this is important then is I think we should be where people are. So if people are spending that much time in text messaging, that it's the #1 activity on a smartphone, that it's 90% open rate, then I believe that that's where we should be when we're trying to help people with learning and development and improving their skills, especially on mobile as well. You know, when I asked you about the activity on a smartphone, you were saying, someone said we check it like 4 million times a day. We check, you know, our social media. We ask Siri questions all the time. So we are there a lot. We're on our mobiles a lot. So why not put our learning there as well? And yes, Joan, it does include things like WhatsApp. Like you'll see a bit later, actually in the next slide, I'll tell you some stats on messaging worldwide. So people worldwide will send, okay, this is a crazy stat, 8.3 trillion text messages just this year alone. That's about 23 billion messages a day and 16 million messages a minute. That's a kind of insane statistic. And it just kind of reiterates for me and shows that if we are spending that much time in this one space, let's have our learning happen there as well. And a chatbot, the thing that a chatbot can do for you is automate that experience for people in that space. And so that's another piece that I like about it. Like I don't have to be sitting there and sending out all these text messages to my employees all the time so that they learn. The chatbot can do that automatically for me and can make it a more like tailored experience for the user as well. So another thing I want to show you is that a few years ago, in 2015, the usage of messaging apps actually surpassed our use of social networks. And that's, I think, quite a significant change. Before that, we were super addicted to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all this social media. But now the big four messaging apps like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, they surpassed the use of social media. And so I remember years back, people used to say, well, how can we get learning into like Twitter or Facebook? And I was exploring doing that as well. But we are more and more into our messaging apps. So why not put the learning where people are? Where does Twitter DM as a direct message come in these numbers? Well, Twitter, my personal experience, I don't get much usage out of the direct message. I'm not sure what it's like for others, but this is basically an overall use. So it's all features in those apps. So it would include Twitter direct messaging as well. So yes, messaging has surpassed that usage. And it's interesting for Twitter, I think the use of Twitter itself has dropped in the last few years because of just the way that that platform sort of exists in the wild right now with bullying and bots and all those other things that are going on with that. So as I mentioned before, oops, I clicked twice there, sorry. I like to try to always make the learning frictionless. The more barriers we put in front of people, the less likely they are to use that whatever we're giving them, that content or the learning. And so I really like to make learning frictionless. And I think that the chatbot allows that. It's like in my phone, it's in my messaging platform. I already know how to message. I'm in there all the time messaging friends. And so it's a nice frictionless experience for people. For example, you don't need another login and another password. And I think that's quite an important distinction because a lot of times I've heard what people are saying, oh God, I need another login and I need another password. Like how many do we have already, right? And with a chatbot, you don't need that. You just start. It's in your messaging and it just starts without needing login and password. So again, just removing a couple of barriers for people so that they're more likely to engage with that learning experience. I'm just going to check the chat to make sure I don't miss things. So Michelle has said, all my old email traffic has moved onto Twitter direct messages. Oh, that's pretty awesome. I was using Twitter quite exclusively for a while too because I can't really stand email that much. It just, I get overwhelmed and I can never seem to keep up. So that's really interesting that you've moved that to Twitter direct message. I love that actually, that's cool. And Joan is asking if people want to tweet about this. Oh, yeah, that's very important there. We have a hashtag if you'd like to use it, eLN event and chatbots. As showed you in the beginning, my Twitter handle is the Jamie Good, so it's pretty easy if you want to mention me in your tweets as well. Thanks, Joan, for pointing that out. So I think as I mentioned earlier, we are getting more accustomed to using apps like Netflix and Uber. They're becoming part of our life, like Airbnb as well. And that means that we are getting accustomed to having things on demand. You go into Netflix, you get the show that you want when you want to see it. You don't have to wait till 9 o'clock Thursday night or, Monday at 10 to see the shows you want. You just go on Netflix, you see what you want. You can watch as much as you want. You can binge a whole season of Stranger Things in one weekend like I do if you want to, but we have that option. And so I think we take our consumer habits into the workplace. And so why not create learning that is similar to this, in that we can provide for people learning that is on demand when they want it, available at any time. The other thing, like similar to Uber, is that people are getting more and more accustomed to having this experience of having things just in time, like when they need them. I was in Providence, Rhode Island a couple of weeks ago for a conference, and I was using Lyft, which is a competitor to Uber, and it was great for me. I just like, oh, I want to go home from the conference now back to my Airbnb, so I got my Lyft app out. I clicked, it showed me when the guy was going to show up, and I got a nice ride home and didn't get wet in the rain. I think we are getting more and more accustomed to this, that these things come just in time, like when we need them. And so why is our learning not like that too? If I am in the middle of something at work and I need an answer to a question or I need to know something, I want that thing at that time. I don't want to wait a couple of days until I have an in-classroom training session to learn that thing. And so chatbots allow us to mimic that consumer experience that people are having more and more now on their mobile with learning and development. So I have another question here. Starting to think about this, I'm sure now with some of these details you're starting to think, and I'd like to ask now, how might you include chatbots into your instructional strategies? Your brain's probably starting to kind of mull this over and think about what you might be able to do with this. And so before we go a little bit further, I'm so curious now how you might include chatbots into your instructional strategies. So Fiona's saying for quizzes, perfect. Coaching tool, awesome. Knowledge check, yes. Help find relevant content, coaching, feedback, sales branch scenarios. Oh, excellent. Yeah, that'd be fun. I would love to use that as a job aid, someone says. Direct them to the best training. Yes, that's a great idea as well. Sending them to certain links. FAQs, a tutor on demand. Oh, that's a really cool way of putting it. At the point of need, on the job, branch scenarios for customer care, learner support, passwords, usernames. We are thinking of translating competency frameworks via a chatbot to content discounting for prior learning. Oh, excellent. Someone says to filter them using like a training needs analysis. Oh, these are super good ideas. I hope these are great ideas. To filter, sorry, as a mentor, these are really good ideas. You guys are really thinking about great use cases. Self-assessment tool, yes. If you use Wobot, the bot that we mentioned earlier, you will see how it works as a self-assessment tool for your mental wellness, and it's a really good way of doing that. Answer FAQs about our services and signposts. Wow, these are great ideas. You guys are really thinking about this already. I love it. Make sure I just didn't miss any. Conversational practice, that would be an excellent use case for it as well. And I think I got all of them. Yeah, that's great. These are such good ideas. And there's a couple new ones here. Can they be used for evaluations? Yes. So one of the things I do like about a chatbot is you can get an evaluation on the learning experience in the middle of the learning experience. So I've seen this happen before where you can have people tell you how your session is going in the middle of the session. You can get real-time feedback of whether what you're giving people is actually relevant and useful to them or not. You can also use it for evaluations. For example, you'll see in a use case coming up where you've given people content and then you evaluate their knowledge of that content later with the chatbot. Another question, do some people use them to communicate info about training events? Yes, you can also do that as well. So you can send out reminders, for example, and say to people, don't forget this training is coming up on this time, this day. And then someone's asking, what about delayed response? Say one month later. to see if they've actually used the content, yeah, you can totally do that. This is the nice thing about a chatbot, is that you can automate that check-in, you can automate that retrieval practice, so that if you want people to do it, let's say next Tuesday, and then 2 weeks from then, and then a month later, and then 6 weeks from now, you can just automate that, and the chatbot will just do it for you while you work on other things. So I think that's a really great thing about chatbots. So I have a few instructional strategies that I just put on this slide just in case we didn't get a few of them. So reminders was one thing that people mentioned, polling, which I mentioned, real-time feedback, performance support, and practice and assessment. So you guys had all of those. That's great, and even more. So it's so excellent that you're thinking in these directions. Another thing I like to say about chatbots that I like is that it puts the learning into the learner's pocket. And I think that's a really great kind of way of thinking about it. Not everybody these days sits in front of a computer or a laptop like they used to. I was talking to a gentleman the other day who said, I will have my laptop there on my table, but I will be looking and working and doing things on my phone, even though my laptop is right beside me, because we are just so used to it now. And they're addictive devices. So we have them in our hands all the time. We carry them around in our pockets. So let's carry our learning around in our pockets as well. Also, I want to think about retrieval, which we've mentioned, kind of working with the brain. And the one thing about retrieval, I think, is if we give people 3 instances of retrieval, they're more likely to remember the content that we've given them. And a chatbot really allows you to do that easily in a, as I've mentioned, an automated way. You can give people 3 instances of retrieval of the content that you've given them through a chatbot, and in a nice, succinct, easy, frictionless way. So an example of how I did that, Joan has had some experience with this when I launched it at Learning Technologies in London earlier this year. My bot that I put out in the wild was called, very simply, the conference takeaways bot. Because I'm sure, like me, you've been to conferences, you've got all these great takeaways, the keynote speakers inspire you, you're taking notes or something like that, or you're tweeting out the information, and then you go back to kids and work and family and errands and grocery shopping and other things, and you forget all these great things that you've got that you learned at the conference. And so what I did is I built a conference takeaways bot that would allow you to collect your takeaways during the conference in the session that you are in, and then the bot would remind you of these things once you got back home at work the week following and the week after. And it would also not just remind you, apart from just giving you the retrieval experience, it would also, I built the bot to also prompt you to figure out how you would take those takeaways and actually do something with them and put them into action. So the bot would ask you, or would remind you of your takeaway, and then ask you, like, is there someone that can help you make this a reality? Are there barriers for you being able to do this at work, etc.? And so it was a way for me to help people retrieve the information and the takeaways they got at the conference, but also decide how they could do something with these takeaways back at work. So that was an example of a bot that I put out into the world that I thought people took quite good advantage of, and it was helpful for a lot of people. So someone suggesting trying this. Oh yeah, you can, it's still out there in the world. I think it was quite a fun thing to build. Richard is saying, oh yes, I'm that, Jamie. So Richard used my chatbot at Learning Technologies. Great, Richard, that's great. Thank you. I know there were a few glitches with it at that time, but I hope that you found it kind of a nice and fun experience. It's always interesting for me to see how people break the bot, and that basically means the bot is not always capable of responding to everything, and so sometimes people will send things to the bot that is unable to understand, and then it breaks it. So that was interesting for me at the end of the day to go back to the hotel and check in the back end of the bot to see if there were any people that were having trouble or struggling with it, or had the conversation kind of stopped for them. So that's always a good learning experience, and something to be aware of, is that once the bot is put out into the wild, you still have to, even though it's automated, you still have to monitor to make sure that someone isn't stuck, that they got to a certain part of the conversation, they weren't able to go further. So there's a little bit of monitoring that is still, you still need to do. Not as much as maybe other approaches, but there's still a bit of monitoring to do. Okay. So some of the metrics, people are sometimes curious about the metrics. As I said, we can measure some data, and it's good for us to measure whether our learning experiences are actually being efficient and effective. So here are some things that you can measure with a chatbot. You can measure active and engaged rates. So you can see how many people are active with your bot. How engaged are they? Do they use it just for like, you know, a day and they're supposed to use it for a week, but they don't? Are they supposed to use it over a few months, but they drop off in week 2? So you can measure all of these things, and you can see which places in the experience people are dropping off the most, and then there might be an issue there that you might want to fix. You can see all of this stuff in the back end. You can see confusion triggers. So you can see if there are certain questions or prompts that the chatbot sends out that are confusing people and they're not sure how to respond to it, and then you want to fix that. You can see conversation steps. So for example, you can see how many messages the chatbot is sending before someone actually learns something, and the back and forth, because sometimes it might be too much and people give up. So for example, quite a few years ago, Domino's Pizza kind of jumped on the chatbot train pretty quickly, and it was, I think, a pretty cool idea. But you could order your pizza through a chatbot. Pretty novel idea, kind of cool, using the technology in a different way. But then people got frustrated because by the time you went back and forth with the bot, telling it if you wanted thin crust or thick, if you wanted this kind of cheese or double cheese, and the toppings that you wanted, whether you wanted it medium or large, whether you wanted to add Coke with that too, what your address was for the delivery. By the time you went back and forth with that in text messaging, you could have done it faster online with their online ordering system, or just phoned in. So that's something to consider, is how much back and forth does it take before someone gets value out of it, and how many steps does that take? The other thing to see is average number of conversations per user. So how many times are people having conversations with your bot? Are they kind of in and out? Is it regular? Is it every day? Like Poncho, for example, the one I mentioned earlier, most people are doing it every day because it's telling them the weather. Wobot, a lot of people are using that quite regularly too, because it's helping them check in with their mental wellness. And then you want to see retention again. How long are people working with your bot? So with my bot for the conference takeaways, I released it for Learning Technologies in London as a way for people to experience a chatbot, as well as a way to be able to realistically capture their takeaways. But I knew that because it was a new technology for some people, there would be users who would just come on and then get off again quickly, because they just wanted to kind of have a bit of an experience with it for a couple of minutes and then understood it and was like, okay, this is how it works, good, I'm good. And that's exactly what happened. I checked later, and some people kind of did the initial onboarding with the chatbot, and then they just stopped. And then some people actually used it. So that's one thing that I could check, and it didn't surprise me that some people were just exploring and just wanted to kind of check it out. But those are things you can see all of that in the back end. And the other nice piece, if you build it in a certain way, is you can also customize the responses to certain people if you see that they are caught up, or the conversation stopped for them. So that's one thing that I did in London back in the hotel, is sometimes I would have to message certain people and say, you forgot the keyword and this is why the bot didn't work for you. Please next time use this keyword before you respond. Things like that I was able to do too. So that's a pretty cool ability to make it customizable. There's a piece here, someone's writing, I had a really poor experience with a chatbot at the V&A Museum this week, which is a shame as it clouds people's judgment of what bots can offer. Would be good to understand more on how the machines learn. So this is one of the issues currently, in my opinion, is that the machine learning, the artificial intelligence in the background, in my opinion, we are not ready yet to have natural language processing. Bots are getting better at being able to respond on their own, but I don't think they're at a place yet where they can respond to anything that gets thrown at them in a proper and good way. Microsoft has experienced this with their bots, where they release them, and then people purposely sent messages to the bot to train its algorithm to respond in rude and racist ways, and they had to pull that bot off the market. And so I don't think we're at a point yet, because there hasn't been enough training, I guess you would say, for bots to be able to have natural language processing just like a human would. So I'm not surprised that that there's been some bad experiences for some people. Rachel's asking, how do you know if I'm a chatbot or a person? Well, what you need to do in the onboarding process for people in the beginning is tell them that that they are interacting with a bot, so that they know that. Now the other piece for that, though, to balance it out, though, is that you want to write the scripts so that it does sound like a human, so that people will interact with it. But you just need to know from they need to know from the beginning that it is a chatbot, so that if something goes wrong or something's not responded to, that they understand that it's actually not a real person behind that. But this is also why you need to monitor on a semi-regular basis in case someone gets stuck or is kind of wondering what's going on, and then you can respond accordingly. The Turing test is sort out if you're human or not. That's true. Another thing I recommend, and I recommend this not just for chatbots, is I don't know what you call them in the UK, but we call these cue cards or recipe cards. This is something I recommend that anyone who's working in learning and development has beside their desk or in their notebook or taped to the side of their monitor or in their cubicle wall, to remind them of the size of the space they're designing for these days. Because in reality, even if you're designing e-learning on your laptop, but you're hoping people are going to use it on their mobile, you have to remember that. You have to remember that lots of text doesn't show up the same on a mobile as it does on a laptop, that the image might be a lot smaller for people. How much do you want people to scroll through with their thumb through a paragraph of text, for example? And so with a chatbot as well, do you want people to have this super long text that they have to read? Don't forget that not everybody's screen size is a huge iPhone, 10 or whatever number they're out with now. So I recommend sometimes for people, just put that cue card somewhere in your cubicle or your workspace, so you're always thinking like, I need to make my learning mobile friendly, and I need to make it fit in something about that size. I think that's a really helpful thing to do. And then when you're thinking that way, it helps you be more focused and more precise with the material and the content you're giving to people. If you think about the way that we interact now, and if we are messaging as often as we are a lot more succinct than we used to be, I think, in terms of our writing. When we're doing email, goes we can go on forever, but we don't have that same approach with our mobile phones, especially if we're just using our thumbs or we're walking down the street while we're doing it. And so it helps you also remember to be more focused and more precise with what you're feeding people through the chatbot. So with that in mind, I'd like to then talk about the script writing bit of chatbot. So the scripts are basically the messages that people are receiving from the chatbot. And the first question I have for you is, what important considerations are necessary when writing scripts for a chatbot? Super curious to know what you think are the important considerations when you're writing scripts for a chatbot. So Joan says, keep it short and concise. Yes, short and concise. What else do you think? It needs to sound human, chatty, not formal. Exactly. So in that vein, I also say you might want to not worry too much about punctuation. In emails, we end the sentences with periods, but in a chat, we don't when we message people. So you can do the same with your chatbot. Simplicity is super important. Keep it simple. And who are you training? Yes, you got to think about the audience. What kind of language, what's the kind of the culture you're writing for? That will make a big difference on how you write your scripts as well. Should the bot have a persona? So you'll see with Wobot, if you were to try Wobot or Poncho, they do have personas, and they're very different. Like Wobot has a very distinct personality that's a bit corny, and Poncho is a very kind of irreverent, jokey kind of bot. So that is something to consider too, for sure. Approachable, yes, you want people to engage with it, so it has to be approachable. Simple vocabulary, because they may not have English as a first language. This is also important too. And this is one piece where I like Wobot, because Wobot is engaging with people a lot with emojis. And so it's really cool when you get some of the messages from Wobot, they will just be an emoji, and some of your response options will be emojis too. And because we're using emojis more and more, I think it's smart for engagement, first of all, but it also makes it a lot simpler, and it's a more image-based approach to the scripts than actually writing out text. So I love that. Now, the second question, where else can you apply the skill of script writing for a chatbot in the work that you do? So this is something I think is quite interesting to consider. is where else can you apply this skill of script writing for a chatbot in the work that you do? Where else in your work? Let's see what you think. In wider learning design, exactly. Applying personality to instructional tests, yes. In any evaluation polls you do, yes. Great. Lesson plans, excellent. Anything for mobile, yes, 100%. E-learning in general, yes, please. Want to keep it concise and follow personalization principle in onboarding. Yes, all of this is great. Oh, it's so good that you guys are thinking this way. I love it. I have actually recommended to some people that if you're working in e-learning or learning design, emails, yes, please. Keeping emails shorter, I'm a big fan of that. I always say, like, if you're not going to use a chatbot at work, if it's just not possible or you don't have the time, but I recommend, if you just pretend that you're going to, just sit down, one afternoon and go, okay, let's say I'm going to write this chatbot for this learning experience and practice the script writing. You will see how much extra stuff you are adding into that scenario for people that you could remove, that you could chop, that you can edit. And I think it's just a good exercise to do, whether you're going to do a bot or not, to think about when you're doing your e-learning or anything else going forward. Consider, if I was sending this in a text message over a chatbot, what would this sound like or look like? And how much shorter would this be? And it will, I think, really help you to create simple, succinct, concise, focused content for people going forward. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, examples. I'm sure a bunch of you are on here because you want to see some examples, so I have 3. And let's get into those so we have some time for questions at the end. So the first one I have is, there's a company called Sift Science, and then there's a bot that works in Slack, so it's called the Slack bot called OBIE. This is actually a Canadian-made bot. It's just in a town near me here in Hamilton, Ontario, and I've used it before in a previous job that I had, and it works inside Slack. And Slack is like an internal messaging system that a lot of companies use, similar to like Microsoft Teams, for example, or Microsoft Link, but it's a very, very popular platform. And so Sift Science was a rapid growth startup. They're struggling to ramp up new employees, and here are some of the challenges they had. There's fragmented and siloed knowledge, no single place to access knowledge, and then managers were they were getting interrupted multiple times a day for questions that were already answered, but no one could find where those answers were, so these managers were constantly getting interrupted. So, perfect scenario for a bot. Whoops, click twice again, sorry. So what did OBIE do? OBIE helped create a single source of truth. It allows the people to monitor knowledge gaps and insights so that managers can track process and then fill gaps. OBIE allows for push and pull of the learning, which I think is super important because it helps people feel like they're in control of their learning. It allowed for that just-in-time, on-demand learning, and it allowed employees to take control of their learning, which is tailored to their needs. And so what OBIE does is you can connect it in Slack to your, for example, Google Drive. And so your single source of truth can be your company's Google Drive or Google Wiki or something like that. And then it will pull information for people when they request it from that place that you have put those documents. By a quick search, people can say, OBIE, I need information on sales enablement, and then it will pull up stuff for them. It will monitor all of the questions that people are throwing at it so that managers can see, oh, it seems like people are asking a lot of questions about this, so maybe we need to do more training around that, or maybe we need to create a document around that. So these are all the interesting things that OBIE is able to do and help this company. The push and the pull I like as well. OBIE can, as I said, you can automate the push, so you can send out at regular intervals certain kinds of learning for people, but then people can pull from OBIE at any time that they want as well for that just-in-time, on-demand learning. So I think it's a really cool bot, and I recommend that you check it out. I'll just put up here again. It's OBIE.AI is the website, and it's a very, very good, smooth experience for people. When I used it at my last job, people super appreciated it because it allowed them to take control of their learning and fit it into their routine when they had time. And it allowed me to measure all the the questions, the gaps, etc. as well, so that I knew going forward what I needed to add into the Google Drive. Another example, another mobile coach is a company that builds chatbots. They're out of Utah. I think what they are working with is really great as well. And the example that I got from them, this case study was a sales enablement for a large logistics and event technology company. And their challenge was they were training sales staff with this selling fundamentals course, but then the people, their staff, their salespeople were struggling to put these course principles into practice. So they needed to reinforce the techniques and skills in their day-to-day routine, and they wanted to improve retention and implementation of those sales strategies and techniques from that selling fundamentals course. Again, perfect place for a chatbot. So what happens is that when you graduate from the sales fundamental course, then you enroll in this chatbot, and the mobile coach, or what they call the chatbots are called mobile coaches, would provide data on how the sales staff are using these skills to improve sales. So what the chatbot did is in a week one, for example, this week, people would review sales fundamental principles from the course, and then next week, the bot would send them follow-up exercise to practice those principles. Right? And what happened is they got a 93.2% active rate with 57% power user ratio, which is a really great engagement. Power user ratio meaning that people are using it like all the time. So I think that's quite amazing when you think about that. And what happened then as well is they got an increase in selling fundamentals graduates. Because you think about salespeople and they're going all over the place, this is a great way for them to be able to retain and retrieve that information on a regular basis just on their phone, in their pocket, while they're going here and there, and in an automated way, and they don't have to log in every time. They don't need a password. They don't have to. It's super frictionless and a really great way for people to learn. So that's the second example. And then the third example I have is from the UK, from a company that you might have heard of called Filtered. And they have a great chatbot for learning and development professionals and for corporations called Magpie. And here's a screenshot of sort of how it works. So when you first come into Magpie, it asks you like, where do you work? What kind of position do you have? What's your kind of status in the workplace? And then what you're able to do is you get tailored content that's curated just for you. And I think this is really great because one of the things I really like about what's happening in learning and development now is this idea of curating existing knowledge out there in the world. Instead of recreating the wheel and creating new content all the time, why don't we use the great stuff that's already out there? And this is what Magpie allows people to do. Some people are saying great things about Magpie here on the side, which is great. So I'm just going to go to the next slide here, and this shows you where you are able to favorite some of the content that Magpie curates for you based on that initial information it gives you. It has an algorithm that surfaces information and content that is valuable for you, and then you can favorite it, and that just trains the algorithm even more to give you the content that you actually need and it is relevant to you. Then here, what else is interesting is that the users in the company can also take part in making sure that everyone is getting the content that they need. So you see in this example that there's ability to add notes to some things so that you can highlight certain ideas. You can launch the content and go right to it and read it. Like, it's super seamless, very frictionless. I really like what they have built as well, and that they're working on improving the algorithm so that the content becomes more and more relevant all the time, which is what we want, right? We want to save time, and I think we're living in a period of what I call infobesity, and so it's really nice to have something like this that helps us basically cut through all the noise and get the signal and get the things that matter. So if you want to check that out, some people have put here some links of how you can try that out. So that's great, and I love it that it's UK and it's local to a lot of you people there. The other thing that Magpie can do too is it can kind of monitor how you think you are, so you kind of self-reflect on how you are with your skills, and then it will then give you the types of content that will help you with the skills that you tell it that you are low in, and help you develop and be tailored to what you need. I think that's really great because when you think about it at work, in a workplace, a lot of people are in a different spot in their skill development. And so Magpie is built to be able to help people learn when they need to learn the things that they need to learn. So I think it's really good. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing things in the chat because it seems to be going here a little bit quickly. Let me make sure I don't miss something. So are we to find us resources to supplement our formal resources? So yes, that's a very good way that Magpie will help you. Are there other bots like Magpie that search for content? So OBIE does that within the content that you provide internally. So you can pull in external for that as well. There is another bot that just escapes me right now. Sorry, Michelle, that does do something like that. Auto, oh, thank you, Rachel. I didn't read further. Sorry, Auto does that as well, yes. Can you give us an idea of the scale, how much effort to set up? So this is a thing that I believe Filtered sets up for you. And they have been using it with full teams with, I believe, the Royal Mail was one of their clients that used it. So it's you can scale a chatbot to pretty much anybody. Like you can use it for 5 to 10 people, you can use it for 1,000 people. That's the great thing. So the sales enablement example I gave you with Mobile Coach, they're using it with about 500 salespeople, I believe. Yes, and Magpie is free for L&D people to try, so I recommend giving it a try. Like if you're going to try Wobot, Poncho, Magpie, give these things a try. I always say get your hands dirty and see. Once you start using it, you'll start to then understand what possible use cases there are for it. There's another question here I don't want to miss. Nick is saying, what tool framework do you use to create your chatbots? So the one that I created for learning technologies, I use Mobile Coach. I built that on the Mobile Coach platform, and then they helped me by making that available on Facebook Messenger and Telegram because they knew that there were people like me at the conference who couldn't use a UK number, and so I used the bot through Messenger on Wi-Fi at the conference or back at the hotel. I'm not a programmer, I'm not an engineer or developer, and so for me, I use something like Mobile Coach where they have built sort of the back end for me, and what I need to worry about most is the script writing and the sort of branching scenarios and the order of those scripts. So that's the other reason I use Mobile Coach, is that it works in a regular text messaging app, so you just need a phone number, and it also works in other platforms. Some of the bots like Wobot only works in Messenger. Poncho only works in Messenger. I chose Mobile Coach because it can work sort of on a regular phone number, but also in these other messaging platforms as well. What are the prices like for using these services? So that's something you got to ask Filtered. I'm not sure. Mobile Coach runs on a kind of per user subscription model. So if you have, for example, 20 salespeople per month using it, then there's a cost per month per user. I'm not sure what it is, but it probably is in the ballpark of about $5 US per person per month, something like that. But again, it depends on number of users. So the less users you have, it's probably more expensive per user per month. And the more users, it's probably a little bit cheaper rate. What you got to understand is that there are server fees. These bots live on a server somewhere, and there's also the cost of sending the messaging out to a certain phone number sometimes. And so those are sort of costs that are involved. And if you can't develop it yourself and you have to have someone develop it for you, then of course there's that cost as well as paying the person to develop it as well, the technology. So I hope that answered that question. So now I want to make sure there's time for questions. We have some time left. As a kind of a broad overview with a few case studies and a few examples, but I wanted to make sure there were time for your questions and what you were super wanting to know and what burning questions you have. So put them up here, please, in the chat. And again, make sure that you have your setting to all panelists and attendees to make sure that everybody can see your question. Arash is asking, what's the quickest way to get started with building a chatbot like a mobile coach? So with Mobile Coach, you actually have to be certified on their platform. So I actually went down to Utah and I took their course to learn how to build on their platform. But you could also have them build for you. But as I said, there's a cost to that, right? You have to pay their developing team and their script writing team to build the bot for you. The quickest way to start if you wanted to build on your own just to see how it's working, there's a lot of DIY, like do-it-yourself platforms out there. It seems like there's a new one every month now. So you could do a search like DIY chatbot building platforms. Dialogflow is a good one. Chatfuel is a good one. Those allow you to build. And the only thing that happens then is when you start releasing it to people, the more users you have, the more you have to pay because of the server fees. So let me just write those in there. Chatfuel, Dialogflow. Another one that I think is really cool is called LandBot. So those are a few that you could maybe explore to check out for building. Another question, are there any free chatbot building tools out there to build the branching scenarios? There's a lot. LandBot is a perfect example of a free one that would be great for branching scenarios. You start paying when you start having users and more users, because that increases their server fees, so then they have to pass that cost off over to you. Are there any open source libraries to build and host your own chatbot like Eliza from the 1980s? That's a question I'm not sure. Probably. I have to say the thing that I've been noticing is that because chatbots are growing in popularity and use cases, that there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon to try to make some money off of it. So the amount of free things available I've seen has decreased. The amount of platforms available to build have increased, but the amount of free ones seems to be a smaller number than about 4 years ago. Somebody is saying the chat messages are only being shown to panelists right now. So make sure, yes, right above where you're writing in chat, it says to, and just make sure that you hit the drop down and select all panelists and attendees. Thank you, Joan, for that. Any other questions? I'm just making sure I'm not missing any. Prices I answered, quickest way I answered. Okay. Someone says, I've seen a demo using MS Azure and Skype chat, a little bit tricky to set up and also cost involved. Yeah, I don't know a lot of people that build for Skype, to be honest. The most common platform for bots right now is Facebook Messenger, because it is such a huge platform worldwide. And so most people building for bots, like a kind of their first bot or whatever, are building for Messenger because they know the audience is there. Myself included, anything I build in the future will probably exist on Messenger, because I just know that's a huge platform, and that's where most people are. Most people have it on their phone. It's not difficult to use, and most of the bot building platforms are built for helping people build for Facebook Messenger. So Skype I'm not as familiar with, but I know that some people explore that. Some other people are also building bots for voice, like Alexa skills and Google Home. That's a whole other space that I haven't dipped into yet, because it's a very different approach. And for some of the bots that I'm building around mental wellness, I'm not so sure that people would want to say out loud in front of their family the things that they would have to respond to that voice bot about. So I'm not currently exploring Alexa skills myself, but you can also do that. Another question here, do most of these platforms allow web chat options in a web page? Yeah, so you can use Messenger, WhatsApp, Skype, all these things on web and in your browser. And so bot's the same thing. Like LandBot actually just works on a web browser. So if you check it out, you'll see Dialogflow is similar that way too. So it doesn't have to be on a phone. Someone says, I've used Storyline for Alexa to create an Alexa school. Oh, that's cool. So Arash, if you don't mind sharing, what was the skill? Like, what was the thing that you were hoping people would learn through Alexa that you built? I'm super curious what the use case was. And Joan is asking, did you say that the LT bot was still live if people want to have a go? Probably I would just need to reach out to Mobile Coach first to make sure that the UK number and such were still available, because they kind of set aside that number through Twilio for that bot, and I'm not sure if it was for just a certain time of the conference or for longer, so I can just reach out to them and find out. Any other questions?
I was just thinking, Jamie, that if if people did want to have a go at using one, before they have to start scripting one. Because the examples you gave were really interesting, but obviously we're not actually using it ourselves.
Right. Right.
Mind you, when you do things like online banking and they say, would you like to chat now? Are these all chatbots?
Sometimes they are, and what they have set up is that the bot will answer a certain amount of questions or be able to provide a certain amount of information. But then if it gets to a point where a human needs to be involved, then they have it set up in the back end that someone gets alerted on their staff, like through email, for example, and then someone jumps in and a human continues the chat. But a lot of them, yes, they start with a chatbot, and then if it gets to a certain point, they will sub in a human. Sounds kind of funny, but to say it that way.
At the conference session you ran, I was sitting beside a lady from one of the banks, and she said in the training department they have a lot of events, and they got a lot of people. They had 3 or 4 people on the telephone in a call center, just answering the same old questions over and over. And she could see right away that a chatbot could automate that and free those people
Totally.
up.
It also saves HR departments a lot of time, because a lot of times HR departments get the same questions over and over about vacation, benefits, etc. And so you can set up a chatbot for your HR team to save a lot of time and work on more important things. Yeah.
But I suppose you have to really have in L&D, you have to have a feel for what the questions are that people are likely to be asking.
Yeah, which is a really good thing that I liked about OBIE. I was able to monitor what questions people were throwing at it, and seeing what stuff, like what answers didn't exist, what questions were asked repeatedly even though the content was available. So that would tell me that possibly the content wasn't clear enough for people, or it wasn't easy enough to find. So that's a really good thing to be able to monitor, and to make it more relevant, more efficient for people.
Now, I'm conscious of the time, and we try not to overrun, and there's still questions going up. So I'll just turn the video back on. What I'm thinking is that we've got our LinkedIn group, we've got things like Twitter. So what I'm thinking is, I wonder whether people could maybe post questions on the LinkedIn group or on Twitter, or email you to get answers to those questions. Do you want to drop your email in? I've put in your
yeah, sure.
I've put in your Twitter handle already.
Yeah, sure.
I guess I could write in the URL of the LinkedIn group. If you just give me
I have a super fancy email address.
Go for it.
Yeah. People can message me anytime. People are just asking about what the link group is called.
Here's the link to it.
Okay, great. There's lots of good ideas and questions today. I'm super appreciative of that. You guys were, yeah, that's great. This is a really fun chat. I love when the chat window is going really quickly like that. That's great.
Can I mean, I want to thank you now, but I wonder if I can just finish off. Oh, good, there it is. Yeah. So if people have got your email, that's excellent.
I'm on LinkedIn a lot more than I am on email, so if that helps people, let's try to spend more time.
And I'll add that link as well to the LinkedIn group page. I wonder if you can give me back control, and I will just put up the eLearning Network website, because we've got a few events coming up.
Yeah, just one sec.
So let me launch that now as well.
Wait a minute. Okay. I see the poll up, and
okay.
I'm not getting the drop-down menu to give you that control. Why is that not happening?
I think I might be able to do it for you.
How's that?
Okay, are people seeing that?
Yep, I see it. Yep.
Yeah. So you're up there as our #1 event there. We will change that. So most of you, if you're members already, you'll have seen the eLearning Network site, and you can get all the information about joining. But our next big event is we're going to be at World of Learning in October in Birmingham. We're running a live lounge, drop-in centre, and running some sessions. And then next month we've got a webinar on storytelling. with Luke Merrick from Bolt Learning. And then we've got our own annual conference in London on the 15th of November. So all of that information is online. And I think I already showed you the page where we store our videos, and we've got a good number of videos now. So and this recording will go up as well. And if you want, you can subscribe to this channel and then you'll get updates. So we've got people subscribing all the time. So can I just say thanks again, Jamie, for a great session. Very, very practical.
Thank you as well.
Very useful.
Thanks for inviting me.
And maybe we'll see you in February at Learning Technologies.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I really do want to get over there again and see you and other people again that I met. It was a really good time over there, and I love the city so much.
Great. Hang on, chat in meeting. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to stop the recording and then end the session.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. There's great questions and participation. I super appreciate that.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoy your day.